It's good to see everyone here this evening. We're going to start a new study tonight. It's going to be on the Philippian letters. I'm going to cover tonight just an introduction and a kind of an overview of all four chapters, and then we'll go to a chapter by chapter study. So it'll probably be 5 studies altogether to get through Philippians. So, the author of Philippians, as we all know, is the Apostle Paul, and he's joined by Timothy in this. There's a lot of personal references to the author, and it's certainly consistent with what we know from Paul has written in other New Testament sources. It's also supported the testimony of early church fathers, such as Polycarp and Irenaeus in historical documents. This is written to the church at Philippi, which is the city named after Philip of Macedonia, the father of Alexander the Great, and it's a major city in Macedonia. Now, the church at Philippi was established by Paul in his second missionary journey around 49 to 52 AD. They perceived a vision at Troas, and in this vision, a man of Macedonia pleaded, "Come over to Macedonia and help us." Perceiving that the Lord was calling them to go to Macedonia, they sailed from Troas and eventually arrived in Philippi. So, with the conversion of Lydia and the Philippian jailer, the church was established. The lack of a synagogue seems to indicate that Jews were not prevalent, and so the church may have consisted primarily of Gentiles. From the conversion of Lydia and the references to the epistle itself, it's evident that a number of women played a role in the growth of this church. When it became necessary for Paul to leave, Luke seemed to have stayed at Philippi, based carefully upon the observations by like we and they, and as Paul left Macedonia, the church at Philippi became a significant source of support. And Paul visited the church of Philippi again on his third missionary journey, and that's in Acts 23 through 6. Okay, the letters actually appear to be written while he was in imprisonment in Rome, which, if this is the case, it was around 61 to 63 AD from Rome. Okay, now the purpose of this epistle: the church had sent a gift to Paul in Rome at the hand of Epaphroditus, and Paul uses this occasion not only to thank them, but to comfort them concerning his situation as prisoner of Christ. He also writes of his plans to send Timothy and why he considered it necessary to send Epaphroditus back to them. There may have also been a problem at Philippi involving 2 women, for Paul has a few words to say concerning them, and that's in the 4th chapter, verses 2 and 3. Now, the theme of this epistle: it's short and rather personal, but one thing resounds time and time again. That thought is joy. 5 times the word joy is found, and the verb to rejoice occurs 11 times. For this reason, the epistle to the Philippians has often been called Paul's hymn of joy, in which the theme is rejoice in the Lord. So actually, we look at the key verse in this epistle, which would be Philippians 4:4. Rejoice in the Lord always, as I will say, rejoice. I know that probably 4:13 is the most memorable one, but for the theme of this, it's really talking about rejoicing in the Lord. So, let's get into a quick outline overview of the entire 4 chapters. And it starts out with an introduction and a thanksgiving and prayer. And then he talks about his situation in Rome, his imprisonment, his opposition. The imprisonment has actually created opportunities to spread the gospel, and even with opposition, there still is an opportunity for Christ to be preached. And Paul also expects deliverance. By their prayers and provision of the Lord, he knows that all will turn out well for his salvation. Whether he lives or dies, it will be a blessing, knowing that their need of him at the present, he is confident in coming to them once again, and that's in verses chapter 1, verses 24 through 26. Now there's an exhortation to behave worthily in the gospel. In chapter 1, 27 through 30, it tells us to stand fast in one spirit. Strive together for the faithful the gospel. Do not be terrified by your adversaries. Be of one mind by following the example of Christ. Make Paul's joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love. This is in chapter 2. For humility, look out for the interests of others. Follow the example of Christ. And that's chapter 2, verses 5 through 11. Then it says to shine as a light unto the world by working out their own salvation, for it is God who is at work in them. And that's the middle of chapter 2. And as children of God, be blameless and harmless. Consider Paul's imprisonment as a reason to rejoice. That's in chapter 2, verses 17 and 18. Think about that. That's something that seems kind of unusual, but again, when God's working in your lives, you need to be thankful for everything you have. Okay, and then there's plans involving Timothy and Epaphroditus, and he was going to send Timothy soon. He plans to send him, and he commended Timothy. And then again, this is in chapter 2, verses 23, 24. So Timothy to come soon, hopefully followed by Paul himself. And he was also going to send Epaphroditus at once, while Paul felt it necessary to send him and to receive him in the Lord with all gladness. Now, next, beginning in chapter 3, there's some warnings against Judaism and antinomianism. Against Judaism, rejoice in the Lord. Be wary of all those who place confidence in the flesh. If anyone had reason to boast in the flesh, it would have been Paul. But he gave it all up that he might know Christ and the power of his resurrection. And then against antinomianism, Paul's attitude of pressing on to perfection. An exhortation for them to have the same mind, a warning against those who serve their own desires, and a reminder of our true citizenship and the hope it entails. And that's all in chapter 3. And now, moving into chapter 4, there's exhortations for unity and joy and peace. There's an appeal to Judea and Syntyche, and it's prefaced with an exhortation to stand fast in the Lord, and a plea for them to be of one mind, assisted by others. Here's that reference to the problem that they had at Philippi. Then there's an exhortation concerning joy and peace, and that's verses 4 through 9. It's again where it is, rejoice in the Lord always, and to be gentle to all. Through prayer, let the peace of God guard your hearts from anxiety. Meditate on things worthy of virtue and praise, and follow Paul's example. And that's verses 8 and 9. Then there's thanksgiving for their generosity. He's talking about their gift to him, and it is a source of joy to Paul. Paul rejoiced when they were able to care for him again. Not that he really had need, for he had learned to be content with what God had given him. But they had done well to share in his distress, and he was just thanking them for their concern. Their gift was a source of blessings for themselves. He gives a brief history of their giving to Paul in 15 and 16 in chapter 4, and their giving abounds to their own account, viewed as acceptable sacrifice to God, who will supply all their need. Again, we're told to be grateful with all that we have, and God will again supply everything we need. Now, the conclusion is verses 20 through 23 in chapter 4, where he gives praise to God. He gives greetings from those who are with him, even from Caesar's household, and then a final benediction. So, what are some review questions for the introduction? Well, on the missionary journey, on which missionary journey was the church at Philippi established? And we said that was on the second missionary journey. Where can we read about the beginning of the church? In Philippi. And that actually is back in Acts 16:11 through 40 is where it actually talks about the church at Philippi. Who seems to have stayed at Philippi after Paul left? Because there's reference to we and they. And again, we mentioned that in the introduction where Luke stayed back at Philippi. From where and when did Paul write the Philippians? And it was from Rome, somewhere around 61 to 63 AD. What other 3 epistles were written at this time? And this is something that was not in this study, but the other ones were Ephesians, Colossians, and Philemon. And these 4 epistles, when you add Philippians to it, are often called the prison epistles because these were ones he wrote when he was in prison at Rome. What prompted the writings of the Philippian letter? The gift that he received at the hands of Epaphroditus when he brought it to him in Rome. Okay, this question is a little far-reaching. From Acts 16 and Philippians 4, who were some of the members at the church at Philippi? Remember, we had Lydia. She was very active and mentioned. We had the Philippian jailer. We had Euodia and Syntyche, which were the 2 women referred to, and then Clement and Epaphroditus, who was the one who brought the gift to Paul in Rome. So there's at least 6 people named who were members of the church at Philippi. What is the theme running through the epistle? Which verse stands out as the key verse? And we mentioned that it was rejoice in the Lord, which Philippians 4, even though 4:13 that says I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, is probably the most referenced verse in the Philippian letter, and I'll tell you it's one that I draw on a lot. So there are at least 6 main sections in this epistle as given in the outline. One of them was first he's talking about the situation in Rome. Next, the next section is exhortation to behave worthy of the gospel. Then he speaks about the plans involving Timothy and Epaphroditus, and then the warnings against Judaism and antinomianism. And then he gives exhortations to unity, joy, and peace, and finally finishes with thanksgiving for their generosity. So that's a quick overview of the 4 letters. We'll get into them in much more detail starting next week. They're all focused on that main theme, joy and rejoice. So we need to keep that in mind as we're reading this, studying it, and looking at it. And I can't think of a better time than to be joyful and rejoice than the times we're in today. So I thank you very much for your attention. God bless each and every one of you, and I hope to see you again next week. Thank you.